Hi everyone, and very warm welcome to FAIRDM's 2017 webinar series. I'm Natalie Stamford, the FAIRDM Community Lead, and I'll once again be hosting the webinars this series. We have a pretty good turnout today, so I'm quite excited, and I'm sure the talk's going to be brilliant. This webinar series is going to have quite an exciting lineup. We're looking at talks that will cover high throughput data management with OpenBiz, open science attitudes and practices. We'll be discussing a bit about FAIRDM in one of the webinars. We'll be discussing condas and containers and even shorthands for using standards. So over the next few weeks, we've got some quite good talks in store for you. For those of you who don't know, FAIRDM is an initiative to support researchers, students, trainers, funders and publishers. In fact, anyone interested in data management, in better data management practices. We offer software, advice, expertise and training, which make managing your data and models in life sciences easier. You can find more about FAIRDM on our website, which you can see on the screen now, and you can also see underneath that we've got our Twitter address, so you can also find us and tweet about us on Twitter. If you have any questions regarding FAIRDM, you can get in touch with me at community@fair-dom.org. And we're going to kick off this webinar first with a bit of news, and quite some exciting news. So just before the winter break, FAIRDM actually established itself as an association EV and a legal entity. The founding institutions included the University of Manchester, Heidelberg Institute for Theoretical Studies, and New Forest Ventures. This means that interested parties are now able to join us as contributing members. And whilst we're still establishing the finer details of the membership, you can actually get in touch with us directly if you're interested in joining as a member of FAIRDM. And we just want to say a big thank you to Babette Regier and Suzanne Holman, who guided us through the process. You can actually see a picture on screen now of everyone looking very excited about starting our association. Now today we're kicking off the webinar series with Niall Beard, who works for ELIXIR-UK developing software tools and platforms for life scientists. So, hello Niall, are you there?
Hello.
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 Hi.
Hello. Good to have you here. Are you looking forward to your webinar today?
Yep.
Thank you very much for letting me on.
I'm sure everyone's as excited as I am. I'm just going to change the presenter to you. Okay, so here's a brief introduction to Niall. Niall began his career developing BioCatalog, which is an online catalogue for describing web services, and he's since moved on to managing the technical implementation of the ELIXIR test training portal, which is a core ELIXIR resource which catalogues training materials and events for life scientists. Through this work, he's also been involved in developing a variety of metadata specifications for life science resources as part of the BioSchemas project. Aside from technical development, Niall is also experienced in developing training materials, delivering events, and in teaching and organising software carpentry classes. So I'd say he's a pretty well-rounded in this field. Today I'll be discussing his work on tests and BioSchemas. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please address them directly in the questions panel of your GoToWebinar profile. And at the end of the presentation, I'll go through them and I'll pass the questions on to Niall and we'll answer them just before the end of the webinar. So over to you, Niall.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Natalie. Thanks for letting me on. Can you see my screen okay? Is that good?
Yep, can see it fine.
Okay, wonderful. Right, yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. There's quite a lot of people here. I'll try and be lively. So first of all, I'm Niall Beard, and I work at the University of Manchester with Teresa Atwood, Carl Goebel, and Finn Bacall, and I develop tests alongside the University of Oxford with Milo Thurston and Susanna Santasansone. So TESS is a training portal that I'll be describing, and then I'll also talk a lot about BioSchemas and how that kind of plugs into the concept of an aggregated portal. So a little bit of background. So TESS is funded by ELIXIR. It's one of the ELIXIR core resources. ELIXIR, for those of you who don't know, is a pan-European infrastructure. It comprises of some 21 national nodes, plus a node for the EBI, and a special hub node that aims to help coordinate and support the other nodes. So like a hub and spoke system. The overall aim of ELIXIR is to coordinate, integrate, and to sustain bioinformatics resources across its member states, and it enables users in academia and industry to access vital services for their research. Work is split across 5 topics: data, tools, compute, interoperability, and training. And work in these topics are grounded in real-life scientific use cases to ensure the infrastructure works well for researchers. Now, each node has many institutions associated with it. In fact, over 100 institutions that are part of ELIXIR altogether, which yield a complicated distributed architecture. Resources, such as training, events, and materials, are being produced in just about every institution, sometimes cross institutions, but it's a huge quantity, and that's just ELIXIR alone. So globally, as well as in Europe, materials and events are distributed in very heterogeneous collections of websites. As such, they're becoming more and more difficult to find by trainees and harder to get good exposure for trainers. Some are kept in global repositories like Goblet, some on countrywide repositories like the Dutch Tech Centre for Life Sciences, DTLS, and some on institutional sites. Some even on personal trainers' own independent sites. There's an incredibly wide diversity in the presentation and structure of the landscape the resources exist in. So ELIXIR seeks to aggregate and present these widely distributed resources uniformly in order to improve their findability. The oft-cited FAIR principles states that guidelines for data stewardship should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. And as such, ELIXIR is striving here to improve the findability of resources through discovery portals. So how do people currently discover things like tutorials, manuals, presentations, workshops, conferences, and other training opportunities? Well, the first stop is naturally Google it. Google works really well if you know specifically what you're looking for. If I enter, say, for example, proteomics course, the results I get will be from the larger websites that Google has given a higher place in the index for. Events, however, have the quality of temporality. They cause results to be outdated relatively quickly, and they never get particularly high up in search results pages. They also increase in traffic closer to the event, which traffic is something that Google factors in. So if they do get high up, it tends to be after they've already finished or already begun or registration is then closed for. That's when the algorithm decides that it's worthwhile for you to see it. So for materials, there's a similar problem. Small websites not receiving as much attention as large sites is quite commonplace. Large training sites tend to have very large quantities of training resources, and it will be easy for tests to work on integrating these few sites with many materials, and hey presto, we have a site full of useful training. But that's not where our job ends, unfortunately. There is this long tail situation where the frequency of sites containing few materials has shot up. With the advent of easy to install and operate, and I use easy in air quotes there, but roughly easy to install and operate content management systems like Drupal, WordPress, Joomla, a lot of organizations, smaller than viably possible before, are empowered to create their own sites rather than depending on a central repository. The overall effect increases the distributedness of materials and events across the web. So that's kind of the background and motivation behind TESS. TESS aggregates and allows people to register training events and materials. It then has lots of tools and functionality to help users find by filtering and searching the resources that they'll find useful. They can also organize them into packages and training workflows, which I'll go into a little bit further, as well as using other ELIXIR registries data. There's also an ELIXIR nodal view, which attempts to, sort of show the ongoing activities for each ELIXIR node and who the relevant training people are, and contact information, ongoing and news and such in a sort of shop window view. The URL for the website is test.elixir-europe.org. So a quick look at tests. This is the main perspective of tests. The events and materials are separated into different tabs, but they follow a relatively similar user interface that should be familiar to anyone who's ever used online shopping before, or just any old cataloging website. The filters down the left-hand side have, well, you have all of these different facets. So, for example, content provider, which is where we source the metadata from, scientific topic, which is an EDAM ontology term, tools, standards, policies, and databases, which we'll find out a bit more about shortly. We have things like authors and contributors to try and raise the profile of the people who have contributed these things. And license is also quite an important one. For trainers who come to test to try and find training materials that they would find that they would like to repurpose and use in their own workshops, things like licensing become incredibly important. Like whether it's got a permissive Creative Commons license or whether there's no reuse possible without payment, etc. And then there's also an Elixir node view. Now you can select any of the different filters from these different facet types, and it will reduce the number of materials shown in this index page to just what satisfies that criteria. Sorry. Selecting one of the materials as you get filtered from the index page shows you the various metadata attributes for that material. These include all of the filters shown on the last page, as well as an Elixir node association, if it has any, and information about the content provider or the source of the information. A notable additional field here is the external resources. These are linked from a sister registry of tests called BioTools, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. But their aim, roughly, is to provide an extensive catalogue of tools, databases, APIs, and other programs in the life sciences, similar to tests, but about tools. Our intent is to further develop this integration by developing associations between training resources and tests, and also resources from BioTools and BioSharing, which is a registry for standards, databases, and policies. And also to try and allow integrations with other useful things like relevant data sets to the training resource, maybe computational resources and infrastructure that you might need to use to be able to complete the tutorial, and user profiles. So some of the features that we have in tests that I think makes it a very useful resource is, so on the events index page, you can select lots of different filters, as I described earlier. And once you've done that, it will give you the set of all events that meet those criteria. Well, one thing you can do is click subscribe to this filter, and this gives you the URL of a sort of calendar feed that you can then import into your favorite calendar client, like Google Calendar or Apple's iCal client. And once you've done this, this will keep itself up to date and keep you abreast of all of the upcoming events in the area that you're interested in. So another feature that is not strictly tests, but you can also use a bit of JavaScript to embed a filterable event list in your site through IAN Pro. It's IANN.pro. We export all of our resources to a database called IAN, which was in fact a predecessor to tests. They then provide various interfaces to their database that you can embed on your own site. So they have like modules for common CMSs like Drupal and Joomla, or if you have like a sort of tech agnostic stack, then you can just include a little line of JavaScript, which is fully customizable and can be like, neatly integrated into your own site. And this produces a list of all of the available bioinformatics events that are currently known by tests and therefore by IAN. One of the other things that we're working on that I think is one of the most novel and interesting parts of tests and we're very excited to be working on it, is training workflows, also called visual workflows. These are visual step-by-step protocols that allow users to navigate materials in tests in topic or task-related ways. For example, they may encapsulate typical stages of particular kinds of data analysis, such as protein sequence analyses or structure analysis, where each stage in this workflow represents a given analysis step and links to the corresponding training resources. Now, we're working on developing these at the moment and think they could be an excellent tool for navigating resources in a contextual way that is familiar to many bioinformaticians. We're also teaming up with the BioTools registry to allow the association of tools and training materials at each stage. To construct the workflows, we're focusing on giving specialized workshops with domain experts to construct the most useful workflows and also annotate these with ontology terms to aid interoperability. So the BioTools registry, as I've frequently mentioned, is a registry of information about tools, web services, databases, command line tools, desktop clients, and all of the varieties of programs. Now, given the tool-centric nature of training, as often training is given to teach you how to use a new set of tools to complete an analysis, it makes sense to form an association between tools and training materials. The tools registry can, and in the future, will expose which training materials are available for a tool. And we expose the metadata and links to more information on tools that a training material focuses on. We use their API to get the latest and most extensive metadata when creating the association and when displaying it. We also form these kind of associations with databases, standards, and policies from the biosharing.org registry. So, in summary, TESS is an aggregated training portal that attempts to offer functionality to search and filter over the various training materials and events. We try and represent those in a very familiar bioinformatics way through our training workflows that we're ongoing development with. We have subscription service of calendars, but we're also working with some guys at the EBI, namely Frederic, who is working on extending the subscription service to things like email, things like social media handles like Twitter, and basically allowing you to get notifications about the relevant new events and materials that you're interested in. The Ion Events widget, which is a very long-standing and robust widget that has been relatively widely adopted by various people, can show off the events. And the integration with BioTools and biosharing, that's come on leaps and bounds, but we still have some more work to do on that. And there's also the ELIXIR node views, so we're hoping that this can be a really big place to promote each country or each node's training activities. We're also very keen on developing with the BD2K, who are creating a relatively similar training portal to us, and so we want to try and sort of synergize with them and not repeat the wheel, not reinvent the wheel too much. We're also working on curation tools, so automatic categorization of events and materials to any damn topic, to try and make a very simple, semi-automated process for what little curation ability we have. Yeah, so that is roughly TESS, and now I'm going to talk a bit about schema.org, BioSchemas, and the hell of a time we've had trying to aggregate training resources. So large sites with lots of financial resources or development time tend to have more features such as RSS feeds, XML dumps, or APIs that allow us to easily extract and add resources to tests, as I kind of mentioned before. Smaller sites, however, tend not to. Maybe they lack the resources to develop APIs, or maybe there's just not enough use cases for them to make sense to prioritize the creation of one. It is, however, a problem if you want to register them in tests automatically. Now, the obvious solution is to manually look at the page that you want to add to tests, identify the information you want to add, and fill in the form in tests. Registering them in this way, however, is not sustainable without considerable curation funds, at least practical or scalable when you're dealing with hundreds and, in events cases, thousands of events. So a more dynamic option would be to create a HTML scraper. So what we can do is write these custom scripts, and this looks at the HTML of the page. So HTML tags, heralding back to the MySpace days, but they adorn content to determine the style, spacing, layout, coloring, and all sorts of view information. We can use these tags to as identifying features and extract the content within them. This, however, is difficult. Not all sites have unique tags around the relevant bits of information, and any changes to the layout likely will completely invalidate the scripts. And when we're dealing with quite a lot of scripts, maybe 30 or so, this can feel a lot like spinning plates. So we need a better solution, and that's where schema.org entered into the ring. So for those sites where an API can be too difficult to implement, or end up with too many overheads for them to maintain, or they can't prioritize it, a good compromising solution is to structure the web data using schema.org. So schema.org is the product of a consortium of search engines getting their heads together, and what they've done is, because search engines deal in information, through matching words in the sites that they've indexed with queries that the user has made, they can make a decent guess at what page you're after. But if they knew explicitly what a web page was referring to and what the attribute values of that association were, they could improve their search and present a more fact-based interface. And so that's exactly what they've done. They've constructed a library of vocabularies to describe various online concepts and objects. The library is very vast and covers a wide variety of things: films, recipes, events, creative works, medical conditions, scholarly articles, persons, you name it, and they've got it. And if they haven't got it, as we've discovered through BioSchemas, you can make it. But more on that later. Here's a nice generic example of the recipe vocabulary. So the vocabulary is recipe. The recipe has properties like cook time, nutritional information, time to make, and each of these properties have an expected type, which are either atomic types like text or number, or another vocabulary such as nutritional information or item list. So we have this library of different vocabularies. How does this get applied? Well, here we have the BBC Good Food website with a recipe for good old potato salad. You can see it has a lot of properties from the recipe model already: nutritional information, title, prep time, yield. But how will search engines know that? They don't have the time to write custom scrapers like Tess has previously done, and they can't connect to an API, as every API is unique. So BBC Good Food needs a standard way of informing Google which properties are present on their site and where. So inside the HTML that specifies the layout, colors, and styles of the web page, explicit tags are added to state that the following information is this property from this vocabulary. This format here is called RDFA, but it's not the only mechanism. There are also ones called microdata, which is relatively similar, and JSON-LD. So this is an example of JSON-LD. It's a block of linked data JSON that can sit at the top of the HTML, separating it from the style. It's a series of key value pairs and can also include non-schema.org context as well. The end result of the recipe being marked up in schema.org allows Google to interpret explicit knowledge into rich snippets that offer at-a-glance facts about a search for object. The added benefit for the webmaster that implemented it is that pages marked up using schema.org see significant rises in search engine results. This is incredibly useful for search engine optimization. The structured data embedded can also be parsed by aggregators like Tess. There are a plethora of tools available to do this. One good visual example is Google's structured data testing tool. You simply input the URL of the page or some HTML, and it will extract any RDFA, JSON-LD, or microdata that it finds there and displays it as so on the right-hand side. So we at TESS have produced several tools in the Ruby programming language. All of them are available open source, so you can only welcome to contact me if you want to get to know them and how to use them. But we've created these scripts and tools in order to parse websites, extract the information, and then upload it to TESS. So how about the actual process of marking things up using schema.org? Google again provides quite a novel tool for doing this, which is called Google Structured Data Markup Helper, a bit of a mouthful. Using this, you enter the URL of the site, highlight and annotate the useful bits of information with a specific schema, and then hit Next. What Google will then produce for you is a JSON-LD snippet that you can copy and paste in your site. So the webmaster for Edinburgh Genomics, for example, here, after completing these steps, can go and copy and paste this JSON-LD snippet into the top of the very page that he's just annotated, so this page on the left. This will allow Google and TESS alike to understand the content of the website and to better expose it in our respective discovery platforms. Here is that very resource as it appears in TESS. So you can see those values are translated across when we've extracted it. So that previous technique using the structured data markup helper is not particularly scalable. If you have many events on your site and you want to annotate all of them, but you also have frequently changing ones, it's very laborious, and it doesn't really make sense to work hard when you could try and work smarter. So you can theoretically do it by hand and use these assistive tools, but the thing is there are tons and tons of tools available for all sorts of CMSs and web development frameworks that you can use to make the process a lot easier and to make it more dynamic. So there's lots and lots of tools available, mostly because industry and commerce support for schema.org integration is huge, which creates a large driving factor in the production and support of these tools. So where does BioSchemas fit into all of this? BioSchemas is a working group that identified the potential of schema.org as a supporting tool for aggregation, and also recognized the benefits of enhancing exposure for resources through search engines. I also identified that schema specifications in schema.org are lacking necessary fields to support the life sciences. As so, we set about surveying various sites and finding out what metadata was missing in schema.org and what are present in the real world to make an empirical, well-justified recommendation to schema.org, and then proposing these as amendments. The response time and enthusiasm from schema.org was impressive, and the uptake from the completed specifications has been very promising. So, given the example work done in TESS, BioSchemas has expanded the number of specifications we're actively working on. Aside from work on the generic types like tools, events, training materials, and person profiles, biological content types like pathways and proteins that are not well represented in schema.org are being worked on. I've only really to talk of my experiences with TESS, but there are lots of efforts ongoing in other domains or other projects. So tools, BioTools is also working on aggregation using the tool schema. Simon Jupp and Tony Burdett from the EBI are working on mapping ontologies with data. And there's also mapping of JATS, journal article tag suites for metadata citation. And as well with the UK biobanks, another trying to use this as an aggregation tool. One of the other things that BioSchemas offers is, so schema.org provides a relatively unconstricted, lightweight metadata schema. So it's excellent to get a very broad reach, but sometimes portals have requirements and constraints that schema.org cannot allow restrictions for. So as such, BioSchemas offers this extra layer, unofficial to schema.org, that includes restraints such as cardinality. So that's like the number of times a property should and can occur within within an instance of a schema. Things like minimum information, whether something is mandatory, recommended, or entirely optional. This isn't, again, something that is done for in schema.org. So, but for example, test requires that there is a title and a description. So we need to have this extra layer applied by BioSchemas and control vocabulary. So whether the term should be constrained to a controlled list of terms. So for example, from an ontology. So BioSchemas compliancy is like an extra layer of constraints to schema.org that portals may wish their content providers to reach to be able to make sure that information will be of a high enough quality. BioSchemas have developed and are developing tools to verify that a site has BioSchemas compliant data. So yeah, just to sort of wrap up and to summarize, I guess, so TESS is this training portal that presents all of the ELIXIR opportunities and also from within Europe and globally for training. And it does this by automatically aggregating resources through custom scripts, interfacing with either APIs or now through websites that have marked up their web content with schema.org data. So apologies for the brevity of the list of thanks. There's been so many people that have helped and developed BioSchemas and been involved in the construction of tests. But the core team, really thank you very much to developers Milo and Finn and Alex Nedovich, and yeah, to Susanna and Terry and Carol, who've been overseeing the test project. BioSchemas is a very, very active group, and if you do want to get involved in any of the existing schemas or propose any others, you can head on to bioschemas.org and contact the relevant mailing list for more info on how to get involved. We will be hosting the BioSchemas kickoff meeting, which will be on the 6th to 8th of March in Hingston in the UK. Thank you all very much for listening. The links to the websites are listed just there. Yeah, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks Niall for that. That was a really nice presentation. Just a reminder to everyone that we are recording the webinar, so you can also watch it back or share it with other people afterwards. It'll be on the website in a couple of days. So what I wanted to start with now is some questions. So we've got a few questions already proposed by the audience. And if anyone else has any more questions they want me to ask to Niall on their behalf, please type it into the questions panel on your control panel. So one of them I'm going to kick off with is a question of my own. So one thing I was interested in with the test portal is if there is materials in there, is there a way of me being able to understand the quality of the training materials, or how relevant they are to specific aspects of my field or accreditations within my field?
I'm muted. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So it's an interesting question. We've long since considered the possibility of allowing community ratings to offer various degrees of assurance about the quality of training materials, but this has been quite difficult to do unless you have like a large number of reviews. They tend to just be people making a mistake and using the wrong material and them considering it wrong. One interesting example I remember reading on Amazon, and someone gave like a 1-star for a product, and it was because the plug was the wrong size for their sink. They just didn't measure it up. They didn't buy the right plug, and that kind of issue kind of comes with sort of community ratings. We do have curators on the site who can offer things like target audiences, which are sort of free text specifications of like who the material is aimed towards, and also the difficulty level, who can expect to find the materials accessible. But yeah, that's as far as we've gotten with that kind of thing. There is in the ELIXIR training portal an activity about trying to create metrics to assess training materials, and so we hope in the future to be able to plug into whatever outcomes they develop.
Okay, that sounds good. I think you're quite right there. It's difficult to assess the quality when it's very dependent on the exact areas you're working in. So it definitely makes sense. Another question I had was with respect to the node view of the training resources on the test portal. For the node view, is this specific specialized resources that are recommended by the nodes, or is it just any resources that are relevant or produced from the particular country itself?
Yeah. So it's the latter, really. It's the ones that have been ELIXIR funded or created with the ELIXIR badge. We are still kind of working on what the ELIXIR badge means specifically. We have things like key performance indicating that are required before you can become an officially ELIXIR badged training resource. But yeah, by and large, it's the ones that have been produced by ELIXIR.
Okay. Now I'm going to go on to the listeners' questions. We've got quite a few now. So the first question is by Paola Masuzo, who says, the Array Express example you showed, there are a lot of fields that aren't specified in it. And obviously that hampers findability with the resources. Is there a minimum mandatory information that people need to provide for content within the portal?
So there is a minimum information model, but we kind of keep that quite low. We think it's better to have a larger amount of materials and events and tests than to raise the bar very, very high and massively restrict the number of materials. But I do agree that it's a little bit it's difficult to try and get all of the metadata. A lot of the time we feel like you're kind of sort of scrapping around. A lot of it's not available on the end resource websites. But we do try and sort of compensate by that. One of the ongoing activities to try and fill the metadata more is to have a automated classification of scientific topics for training materials and events, where we pass a textual description of the material or event to a program that will sort of spit out an EDAM ontology term, and then these will kind of pad out the topic metadata. For other metadata, we do allow curators to add extra bits of metadata if they can discover it.
Okay. Another one by Paolo Masuzo is related to packaging. So you mentioned packages. They're wondering who can create one, and that there's currently 5 packages on the portal. So would you be able to elaborate a bit on whether it's a general thing that people can create packages, or if it's very specific that only certain people have the authority to do this?
Yeah. So the idea of packaging is it will be able to be used quite generic way. So it could be a collection of like materials that you want to sort of bookmark, or it could be that it forms a kind of curriculum of materials all kept in one package, or it could be a user's portfolio. We've left it relatively up to the user, and the user can be anyone who just registers for an account on tests, and they can create their own package. They can keep them private, so many of them are kept sort of private as a sort of personal bookmark folder. The ones that are available are the public ones on tests. I feel like packaging still has a little bit of a way to go. I mean, my concept of it was that we would be able to lump in extra resources. So you would be able to associate data sets, computational infrastructure, like where you can find, say, for example, a VM or a Docker image of the specific tool, and more information like that into it. But I think like a lot of the ideas that we did have for the packaging kind of migrated towards the upcoming development of training workflows.
Okay, so they're in a slightly different format to what was originally planned.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's kind of evolved into this contextual navigational graph.
Okay. I think we've got quite a few questions, so I'm just going to stay on the test portal for now and then move to BioSchemas, just because that was the order of your presentation. So we've got a question from Ian Silito, which is, do your resources get regularly pinged to make sure they still exist?
They don't get pinged. What we do have is so the bespoke scrapers that we write that extract the schema.org or connect to an API, they get run every single night. So they constantly get updated within every 24-hour cycle. And we do flag things if they were no longer accessible or if they couldn't update for some other reason. And then this kind of gets shown on, so if you have an account where you're a curator, it brings up this big red flag, and then you can go and investigate whether or not the scraper was broken or whether or not the material is no longer accessible. We don't actually ping every single resource.
Okay, so if anything major happens, it's likely the users will know about it. Yeah. Okay. And also related to the test, a question from Anna Lyda, which is, does the test contain any statistics on the courses? So, the number of people who attended the course, or evaluations from the course, for instance.
Yeah, that's another good question. So one of the other ELIXIR training platform activities is key performance metrics, which is being done by Louisa Bellis. He's also in the UK. And they're collecting that kind of information about ELIXIR resources. And what we hope to do at some point soon is to automatically feed that in and sort of color the metadata for each event with those kind of metrics. We collect our own metrics in the number of users who select and filter through training materials and events, so we can kind of see which ones are popular hotspots. But we've not made that information public yet, but that is something that we're quite interested in doing.
Okay, that sounds quite interesting for the future then. And now on to bioschema questions. So one question we have is, if the bioschema is in progress, this is a question by Ian Silito again, are there any recommended best practices to use for reference? So given it's still developing, is there any other resources people could use to make sure they're getting the right type of information in there for best practice?
For the construction of bioschemas, for the construction of new bioschema specifications. So each of the specification documents that we're developing has lots of information about how best to use things, minimum information models, and ontology terms and such. The actual construction of the exterior, like the specifications, is still kind of I guess we've been carving out the process. The sort of guinea pig was the training materials and events one. But to construct the specifications, we've been using sort of spreadsheets, finding all of the different content providers, finding out each metadata field that was in each one and sort of mapping them to one another. All of that work can be found on the bioschemas.org website if you go under the specifications and have a look at the documents there. But I think that's kind of one of the things that we need to work on at the Bioschemas kickoff meeting in a couple of months. It's about that kind of process.
Okay. And we've just had a couple more questions drop in from Stian, Soil and Rays, and they're actually about the TESS again. So the TESS is a very popular aspect of this talk. So he asks, the link to BioTools is great, but is it possible to find training events and materials in TESS starting from the BioTools website?
So this is something that we're working on at the moment. I think it is in the BioTools roadmap. We've made the associations on the test side of things, and we're exposing those associations through the API so they can sort of say, here's the ID of a tool, what materials have you got? And at some point they'll be able to create a nice user interface where it just displays the relevant training materials in BioTools. But that presently isn't there, unfortunately.
Okay, but it's something expected for the future.
It is, yeah. It's well in plan.
And I think the final question is, what is the geographical usage of TESS? So is it just ELIXIR partner countries, just EU, or is it a global resource?
It's a global resource. We have been getting traffic from lots of different countries. I couldn't tell you offhand specifically which ones are the hotspots, but there are sort of parallel activities in the US. So I imagine most of them will be in Europe, where we've kind of more heavily advertised to you, and where we kind of promote ourselves at various conferences and such. So it tends to be more European, but there are a lot of people who use it elsewhere. We include resources from anywhere we can reasonably find them. So, for example, Goblet, which is the global organization for bioinformatics, we include all of their resources. Thank you.
Okay. So I think that's the end of the questions on the panel here. So thank you for going through those so clearly. It's been really useful. For anyone out there who still might have some questions that they want asking, maybe they're more longer answer, feel free to send an email through to FAIRDOM or contact us at community@fair-dom.org. We can pass on any messages to Niall, and obviously I'm sure you're prepared to reply in due course. So that's it for today's webinar. I think you'll all agree it was a very interesting start to the series and a very good one. And we look forward to seeing you at our future webinars. One thing I would like to say is that there is a small survey that will pop up when you close your webinar. It will only take 2 minutes to fill in. It just helps us assess some of the quality of how the webinar reached you. We'd be really grateful if you could fill that in for us. And another point from FAIRDOM is that we are actually encouraging people where possible to sign up to become FAIRDOM network members, which just you'll receive things like our newsletter to find out regular things that are happening. And you can find that on our website at fair-dom.org. So if you want to hear more about FAIRDOM and what we're up to or where we might be, then please head over to the website and sign up. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day, and thank you for joining us again at our webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.